Hello and welcome to this session of Excel training featuring macros. A macro is a function in Excel that allows the user to record keystrokes and mouse clicks while working in Excel. It then saves the sequence as a convenient command for repeated use. Through this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to the following topics: macro navigation using the Developer tab, recording macros, viewing macros, running macros. I'll show you a few sample macros, and I'll introduce you to control functions. Macros can be accessed from the Developer tab on the ribbon. For most of you, this is probably hidden. To display the Developer tab where the macro functions are located, go to File, Options, Customize Ribbon, and select the Developer option under the Customize Ribbon section. Once selected, the Developer tab will then appear on the ribbon. Another way to select the Developer tab is to right-click on any item on the ribbon, hit Customize the ribbon, which brings up the same exact window as before. The two sections covered in this tutorial are code and controls. We will explore the various options within these sections throughout the tutorial. Let's start with recording macros. Macros can be recorded by using one of two methods. You can either use Developer, Code, Record Macro in the Excel ribbon, or click the Record Macro button at the bottom of the screen. Either button will produce the Record Macro box, requesting some basic information from the user before the recording starts. Prior to hitting the Record button, the user should be aware of the Use Relative References selection under the Code section. If this item is not selected, all macros will be recorded in absolute terms. An example is if you select cell A1, then record a macro that moves the selected cell to A3, the recorded macro will then move the selected cell to A3, even if you have J8 selected. However, if you selected the Use Relative References option, the result of running the macro would move the cursor to J11. This is an important thing to remember as it will impact the way the macro runs. Let's walk through an example of recording and running a macro. On this tab, we see a sample time details template that contains resources, dates, two columns of useless data, charge codes, and hours. Every week we pull this data, and every week we do the same thing to the report before we send it to our project lead. First, we reformat the dates so that they are in the proper date format. Then we hide the two useless data columns. And finally, we add a conditional formatting rule to search for the charge code AFS 24502. These three tasks don't take much time, but we'd really like them to take no time. The perfect tool to do this is a macro. Here's how. First, select one of the Record Macro buttons. I'm going to use the one on the bottom left. Let's enter the name. No spaces can exist in the name, but underscores can be a good substitute. Let's use recording a macro example. I'm not going to create a shortcut key for this macro, but that can be a way to speed up running the macro in the future. If you want the macro to always be available to you, you'll want to store it in your personal macro workbook, but for now I'm just going to store it in this workbook. For the description, I'll add formats, time details, report for project lead. Click OK. We are now recording. Every action you take within Excel will be recorded in the macro. First, let's select all of column C and format the date to its proper format. Next, let's hide columns D and E. Finally, let's add the conditional formatting to column F to look for charge code AFS 23502. 24502. Now that I'm done with the macro, I'm going to end the recording by selecting Stop Recording button, which again appears in both the top and the bottom of the screen. To show you what we just did, let me reset the data and then run our newly created macro. To view the macro you just created, select Macros under the Code section to view. This will pop up a macro box which will show all relevant macros. You can select where Excel should look for the macros. The options are All Open Workbooks, This Workbook, Personal, and any other open workbooks that contain recorded macros. From the list, you can select your desired macro and either Run, Step Into, Edit, Delete, or Options. Run will obviously run the macro immediately. Keep in mind that if you selected Use Relative References, the macro will run from wherever your cursor is located. Step Into and Edit will take you to the Visual Basic screen for Excel known as VBA. We will not go into detail for this functionality, but if you are familiar with VBA coding, you can make Excel do amazing things with this tool. The Delete button will remove the recorded macro. The Options button will allow you to edit the shortcut key and the description of the macro. I'm going to hit Run. And the macro immediately changes the data into what we set up before. Now, let's look at a few preset examples that I've prepared to show you the different capabilities of macros. Macro 1 shows the ability to automate various calculations. You can certainly boost the complexity of the calculations, but I just kept it simple. Here's an addition function. And here's a multiplication function. Macro 2 simply adds predetermined text to a predetermined cell. Macro 3 formats a few cells into predetermined colors. Macro 4 displays the ability of Excel to create custom functions based on user-defined inputs. This function, OIConvert, takes CCI dollars and calculates an estimate of OI dollars based on OI being roughly 40% of CCI. Macro 5 displays two buttons that run macros when clicked. Button 1 simply displays a basic message. The Answer button displays a more complex user input with some basic coding behind it that utilizes if functions. Let's give it a try. This concludes our macro tutorial. We hope that you found it useful in dealing with macros. Please check out our other Excel training videos for more useful tips and tricks.